Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another Adventures in Machine Learning. This week on our panel, we have Miguel Morales.
Hey, everyone.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. I'm just going to throw this out real quick. I'm starting a new podcast called Dev Influencers. You can find it at devinfluencers.com. If you're kind of stuck as a senior dev or at the top of your career and trying to figure out where to go next, influencer might be a path you want to consider, so go check it out. We have a special guest this week, and that is Francois Bertrand. I get to practice my French. That's about as far as it goes, though, the fake accent. So,
pretty good.
Francois, do you want to introduce yourself and let people know who you are and why you're famous? All that good stuff?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely very famous.
When I went freelance, I was still only a few years into my development career. My first contract, I was paid $60 an hour. Due to feedback from my friends, I raised it to $120 an hour on the next contract. And due to the podcasts I was involved in and the screencasts I had made in the past, I started getting calls from people I'd never even heard of who wanted me to do development work for them because I had done that kind of work or talked about or demonstrated that kind of work in the videos and podcasts that I was making. Within a year, I was able to more than double my freelancing rates, and I had more work than I could handle. If you're thinking about freelancing or have a profitable but not busy or fulfilling freelance practice, let me show you how to do it in my Dev Heroes Accelerator. Dev Heroes aren't just people who devs admire, they're also people who deliver for clients who know, like, and trust them. Let me help you double your income and fill your slowdowns. You can learn more at devheroesaccelerator.com.
I've been doing, I'm passionate about data and data visualization, always have been. My day job is in video games, which makes me a bit of an outsider in the field. Yeah, no, it's great, but it has similarities as a lot of software development does, where you're facing hard problems that you have to creatively solve. In my case, I do have an underlying passion for data. I'm the kind of guy who'd look at an Excel spreadsheet and just stare at it for an hour, just thoroughly enjoying it and seeing all the patterns and looking, crisscrossing. What does that mean? Oh, that's cool. That's great. Just somebody be looking at me think I'm insane, but that's just the way it is. But so, despite not being in the field, I did spend, hundreds and thousands of hours in the last 20 years, as long as I've been doing development, doing all sorts of data projects out of passion. I did way back in the day. I did some genetic programming. I had all the genetic programming books in the 90s. Probably wrote the world's most efficient genetic programming system. Super multi-threaded, parallel. I'd evolved these huge trees to fit a curve, but then I kind of ran out of problems to solve with that one. But so yeah, I've done all sorts of things along the years. Wrote a couple articles on stock analysis and new ways to visualize data. My background in video games is a lot in graphics, so I'm very and user interface, user experience. So this fits really well with data visualization. We're trying to display all sorts of things, extract information out of raw data. So there was a nice intersection of interest and expertise. And a couple of years ago, I wrote the Neo virtual reality system. I'm sure there'll be a link to share. There's a video on YouTube that shows it in action, where you can visualize all sorts of data in VR. It's actually that's a perfect example of a crossover with video games. And it's really spectacular. I applied it to a couple of problems in Kaggle and seeing physical data. You're literally floating in a sea of data points, which is pretty awesome. I'm always looking for new ways to better understand data, so you can run analysis literally with your hands, circling data, getting the average of points, things like that. True positive, false positives, seeing all that visualized in VR is really spectacular. And I guess to answer your original question, my biggest claim to fame, I guess, is writing the Sweetviz data visualization library, an EDA library. And that was born out of a bit of frustration I have in general with software. I find myself asking, how is this even hard still in 2021? Things like I was trying to transfer a file to somebody else, a large, not that large, a gigabyte file. And then you'd use this. We had trouble uploading it. The thing was disconnecting, all sorts of things that this should be a solved problem. And I run into this a lot doing data projects. or things like reinventing the wheel, because you start a project, you want to know what your data set is like, and you just repeat the same tasks over and over. And I feel, computers, they're pretty good at automating stuff. This should just work. I should just know immediately what is the composition of the data. Some libraries like Pandas profiling, which heavily inspired Sweetviz, do a lot of that, where they, for those not familiar, it takes a data frame in Pandas and Python, and then you get a nice HTML report showing an analysis of numerical data, text data, categorical data. But I found it didn't go as far as I wanted to, and I thought, you keep redoing the same thing. What's the missing data? What are the averages? What are these other things I want to know? But then I wanted to see more. So that's what Sweetviz came out of.
Interesting. Very interesting. And yeah, we were talking before the show, and you mentioned that you were French Canadian, and this is one of my favorite jokes to tell when I meet a French Canadian, and that is that my grandmother was born in France, my grandfather was born in Canada, and so we have nothing in common. But anyway, because my grandfather was born in Alberta, not in Quebec. But anyway, so yeah, it's just funny because folks in Quebec, they think of themselves a little bit differently than folks in the rest of Canada, and they speak French as opposed to the rest of Canada. But anyway, fun stuff. Yeah, this is really interesting just because as we've kind of dived into machine learning over the last year that we've been doing this show, it's been really interesting for people to basically talk about how their models and the things that they're working on are really only as good as the data that they have to work with, right? So as they train models, as they work through different systems and things like that, they have to have good data to work from. And so being able to see it and sort of visually inspect it, this seems like a really excellent tool for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, originally, what the biggest thing I found missing from libraries like Pandas profiling was you're often, there's two main things about Sweetviz that I think, two problems that it solves that weren't being solved previously. One of them was if you're looking at a target variable, going back to let's say the Titanic example, because it's so simple, the survive, did the passenger survive or not? When you look at a data set, or the average price of the house, given if you're looking at a housing data set, you want to know how does that vary with every feature. So you can immediately see, okay, in the case of house prices, how does that change based on the year of the house was built. So, and this is the kind of thing that is extremely common. At the same time, should be trivial. You should know. You look at a data set every single time. You want to know, okay, how's my target variable influenced by all these other features? And that's one of the main things I wanted to solve with Sweetviz is that it immediately, if you give it a target variable, you'll see it graph in correspondence with every other variable. And that's really valuable. Immediately, the ones that are truly influenced, the variables that truly influence the target will jump out at you. The other thing is comparing. If you have a test set, a training set, or different subpopulations, you want to see how is the target variable changing, influenced by subpopulation. Let's say male versus female. Which one of these people survived more, in the Titanic example. And that's something that you really find, you're asking yourself quite a bit, but that wasn't automated before. So Sweetviz wanted to answer these questions that I think are, really big, that don't get an answer immediately usually.
So I have a quick question, and I guess this is a little bit more basic than going into the details. But I'm sure that there's a lot of folks listening to the podcast that are not necessarily, data analysts or experts. I'm going to say in that area. So can you, first of all, define a little bit what exploratory data analysis is, and then second, also kind of talk about the importance of communicating things with data, right? So because I think so when I personally learn about data analysis and learn to use some of the tools in a very basic way, I did so because I wanted to communicate something about what I found, right? So as opposed to prepare data to putting to the model, also data that came out of my agents and things like that. So I needed to prepare that to talk to, VPs and higher level folks so that they could understand the findings that I was having. So can you go ahead and talk about those things?
Sure. I mean, exploratory data analysis, and you can correct me if I'm missing anything, but it's really when you first get a set of data, you want to quickly get a hold of what is it made of? Because a lot of the data is dirty, that you get for a project. There's missing elements. There's things that are doubled up. There's double data points, missing data points. Sometimes there's just wacky data points, bad data, a lot of outliers. So you want to quickly, when you start working with data, not only find those out, but also get a general sense as quickly as possible of what is made up. What is the makeup of your data? What kind of distribution? So, and you will find outliers that way. But so it's a way to, in the first few hours to quickly understand, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. And then you figure out, okay, I need to fix the missing data. And if you have a good EDA, then you'll know, okay, it would make sense to replace the missing data with, let's say, the average of something, or I'm just going to put zeros everywhere it's missing because, of such and such reason. So EDA is really understanding the data. And the way, you're talking about communicating, I think that it's kind of the same thing, because the data, if it's clear to you, it should be clear, it's a good step towards being clear to someone else. So an EDA tool like Sweetviz, where it's inherently visual. You get a report with graphs and numbers, and and that's one of its strengths, is that you immediately see, I was talking about who survived the Titanic, and you see a curve of male versus female, boom, visually it's there. You see the curve is much bigger for, say, female survivors. And then you can look at a graph by age, and then you can see, oh, there's the really young ones survive, and then there's a gap, and then so you can you immediately understand your data more. And that's good for you as a data scientist, but also if you want to explain it to a client, because I have to say the models nowadays are pretty good, in general. If you look at Kaggle, data competitions, often there's a leaderboard with 1,000 entries, and the top 100 are this difference by 0.001%, right? You can see the good the good analysts will get that extra 0.001% performance out of their models. But in general, you get a sense that if you have good data, they say garbage in, garbage out. But if you a lot of the work is prepping the data to be clean and representative and not biased and those kinds of things. But it feels like the models themselves are pretty good if you give them good data. So a lot of the work is upstream to make sure you do get good data. And then and that's part of it is understanding it well. And if you understand it well, then it's also communicating your results, because to your client or the stakeholders or whomever. So EDA is good both ways in that sense. So that's the long answer to that. The other thing with Sweetviz is it does correlation analysis, which is something that that exists, but is also very useful. It's part of that what I was saying about, okay, you want to know who survived the Titanic, then you can see, okay, the age and the gender, is highly correlated or linked to the survivability. And there's some issues with that, because there's a couple of correlation mechanisms that work with numerical data. So you can say, oh, there's a numerical correlation between age and salary, or whatever, two numerical fields. But if there's different methods to use categorical data versus numerical, say categorical like male, female, that's not a number, that's not a continuous number. So you're requiring different methods to do that. So basically there's a whole bunch of methods to see what data is influenced by which data, but they're all separate. So one of the things Sweetviz does is unify them in a single table that is more or less standardized, so you can see all your correlations at once. Whereas with some other methods, you need to do numerical to numerical, numerical to categorical, categorical to categorical, and kind of it's never in one place. And that's kind of one of the things I was talking about. This should quote unquote just work is using the power of computers to get rid of the manual labor and hopefully do something very visual and striking. So that's another thing about it. I mean, in general, coming from a video game background, it feels like, again, in 2021, doing EDA and even some early feature engineering and things like that, where you take, let's say, a date variable and or a date and time variable, and you say, okay, which day of the week is it, which month, because these could have this could help your model work better if you break down a date into days, hour of the day, or day of the week, or month, these kinds of things. All these tasks you keep doing project after project. And again, I think if I had more time, oh my God, it's always time's the limiting factor. But if, it feels like data EDA and some data analysis work could almost be like a video game. And, again, pardon my background, but you should just see your data set, you drag and drop. Okay, this date, I want to do this. Oh, this field, it has, 50% missing data. I'll just replace with the average. And then it just, drag and drop and see it. And then, because we have the technology, we can do this, but it's, there's just all these little systems left and right that data scientists need to pull from. And my utopia is that you can do all of that into one place. And anyway,
it seems like people still want to pay for video games as opposed to data analysis tools, huh?
Yeah, that's a whole nother field.
So what kind of video games you work on? So what kind of, I guess, part of the pipeline of a video game you work on? Is it in the front end, or is it more like the back end stuff?
We're an indie company. I'm the co-founder of an indie studio. We've been around for 14 years, and we pretty much, as a founder, and that's another thing similar to data scientists, you do everything, right? We do, because we're a small studio. I'm doing design, graphics, engine work, pipeline. Again, very
accounting.
Similar. Yeah, actually accounting. But it's very similar to data work, because you have assets coming in. There are all these different formats. You need to, standardize into one thing. And then PlayStation needs one format, the Xbox needs another, the iPhone needs another, and then you need to do that. Another aspect, again, user interface, right? A game needs to be fun and intuitive. And that's, again, my bias for Sweetviz, is that, Excel doesn't need to be fun, or, the Python. But in video games, you're always thinking about, okay, the user is going to look at this, and if he's not enjoying it, if it's not intuitive in 5 minutes, we're going to lose them. So that's a lot of the work. But to answer your question, we're a relatively small shop, but we've worked on every platform in the last 14 years, like PlayStation, console, PC, mobile. We do some work for hire. We do some of our own stuff, right? That's the indie dream. You do some work for hire to pay for your personal creations, and hopefully it works out in the end.
So does this play into the pipeline for the video games then, or is this kind of a side project?
Unfortunately, it's a totally side project. I can't use that. Well, in some cases, things like, you can you can use models in games, but it's rarer. Things like AI and balancing gameplay. There are some fields in video games where data analysis is useful. The biggest one would be in free-to-play games and mobile games, where there's entire departments centered around metrics and customer retention, and you have all these stats about users and active users, retention, and doing A/B testing, and there's a lot of data analysis, but that's not the types of games we were working on.
Right. Yeah, I was just imagining, I did an interview with a friend of mine yesterday, and it's actually coming out as a bonus episode, I think the same week that this episode goes live. So if you're looking for it, hang tight for a couple of days, because I think it comes out on Friday. It's with my friend Jason, and we were talking about how he got into video game development. And initially he was building essentially database query tools that would pull in reports for EverQuest. And then he moved up into actually writing video game code, right, for the game, instead of writing queries and stuff against the backend systems. And so anyway, that's kind of where I was wondering if this would come in. But if you're not writing those kinds of massively multiplayer games that have a backend server that, blah, 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 you're going to pull that kind of data set in and analyze it, then I would imagine that this isn't going to be that kind of useful for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's man, EverQuest. That takes me back.
I know, right?
Yeah, the first MMOs, that era.
Yeah, my experience with EverQuest, just a quick side note, was I got on an online dating system, got matched up with somebody, went on a date with her, and the whole time she complained to me about how her ex-husband did nothing but play EverQuest. And so I never went out with her again because that date was terrible. But I did go check out EverQuest because it sounded cool. Anyway, but I only played it for a couple of days, and I was, and then I was, busy with school. So anyway, but yeah, it's definitely interesting stuff. One thing that I'm curious about with this too is that, going back to Sweetviz. So this is written in Python. Is it web-based? Because I keep seeing HTML in the documentation and stuff. Or does it run inside of Jupyter or something like that?
The answer is yes. Meaning it's
both.
It's all of it. It runs in Python, which runs inside of Jupyter and outputs an HTML report. The end result is an HTML file, fully self-contained, and then it can stick itself inside of Jupyter or be standalone. I mean, again, if I had the most time in the world, I was thinking about hopefully making it interactive, and then I looked even into OpenGL for the web, right? Having 3D reports and things like that. And that's all possible, it's a great environment. There's a lot of flexibility with HTML and plugging it everywhere. So it's promising things, but just haven't had the time. That darn time.
I know, right?
Yeah. But it's so it runs on its own. Similar to Pandas profiling, which again was the inspiration for it. Great job. Kudos to that team.
Do you have any plans to add more features to it, or is it more or less complete at this point?
Oh my God. Yeah. Again, the time factor, because I have plans. Oh, do I have plans? I have piles and piles of plans.
Says every developer ever, right?
Yeah. Oh man, the plans, the visions I have for this, the cross analysis, interactive fields, the 3D stuff I mentioned, reports, tracking the experiments. That's one thing, to optimize the parameters of models, look at visualizing that in 3D things. Oh my God. Yeah. It's just, the sky is the limit. There's so much stuff in there. There is, looking at the field, there's definitely, if I was to do more work, there's more visualizations, obviously, but things like model explainability, the feature importance. These are things, like I said, maybe the R&D on the models themselves. Our models are pretty good. Feels like pipeline efficiency, explainability, visualization is where there's more low-hanging fruit, and that's definitely where I would like to work on in the future. There's a couple of pretty major things I would like to add to Sweetviz maybe in the next year, and then after that branch out into these other things potentially. But man, so much data, so little time. So
nice. The other thing that's always fun to hear about with some of these projects is, has anyone gotten back to you and said, "Hey, we're using this on this"? Like maybe somebody said, "Hey, we took this to space" or something. I don't know.
Oh, that would be nice. Not directly. I do know that it's on GitHub. It's fully free,
right.
Open source. MIT, the most permissive. That's one thing I learned in video games, is that it's really hard to get people to try your stuff with the the internet. There's just so much stuff out there, and for a brief second, I thought, well, maybe this could be a product. And it's like, nope, that's going to be way too much work. You need, as soon as you ask for anything, it just takes so much work. You need to spend more time doing marketing to get people to buy in and really try it. So I wanted as many people to benefit from it as possible, and just say, okay, it's free. And it's been forked quite a few times. I have no idea what people are doing with it, but it's very exciting to see that it's being used. It's being useful in day-to-day activities for people. So that's the goal.
Hey folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
I wanted to get back to some of the things that you said in your intro. You talked about developing some genetic programming algorithm. Do you share that code as well?
That's actually a bit too old. I need to dig that in, but that was interesting. I don't know how familiar you are with the genetic programming thing.
Somewhat. I mean, not too much. In reinforcement learning, we use some of the derivative-free algorithms, including genetic algorithms. I suppose it's I don't know if it's a different name than genetic algorithms, genetic programming, but I suppose it's pretty much the same, right?
Well, the genetic programming, it's the same underlying concept. The thing with genetic programming, and I got all the books by Mike Koza, I think, in the 90s, is that instead of my understanding of algorithms is that it's more about optimizing weights or kind of a flat set of data, whereas the programming part is optimizing trees with nodes, where you have actual programs that are evolving. So it's a whole tree so you have operators, if, then, else. So you can actually build to control robots, to control AI and things like that. So it's more of a node-based thing, which makes it trickier I talked about the program I made, which was that it's not just flat data. You're allocating and deallocating, hundreds of thousands of nodes. So there's a lot of memory allocation, and things are harder to manage than just, optimizing a flat set of numbers. So that's what made it tricky. And it's really, really cool to see in machine learning. Recently, there's been a couple of demos online about robots playing soccer, I think, or in video games. You can kind of see at first the robots are kind of going around randomly, and then they start playing a better game. It's this kind of behavior that you can get from node-based genetic programming also. But it feels like there hasn't been a whole lot. I mean, it's useful for the algorithms for figuring out weights and things like that. But the programming part hasn't been that used, and I moved on from there. But yeah, really fun stuff to see out of pure chaos come out programs. And it's really fun to see how sometimes it comes up with wacky solutions. And I think that a lot of the AI solutions that are evolving, that are self-evolved, do that, where they do something that looks completely insane, but it gets the job done. That's how the program evolved. But you see, what is he doing? And then it just it does, as long as the end condition is met. Whatever the way that the program will be optimized that way.
Right. So it sounds very similar to, genetic algorithms. It's just that you're optimizing computer programs in this case, as opposed to, whatever you're optimizing. But I guess the style of optimization is pretty much the same. It's a black box type of optimization, and you have, features and cross programs and things like that. Yeah, sounds pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, mutation and crossbreeding and So you're pretty much branching pieces of programming trees to each other. So you're putting a stem onto another stem at a certain place, and see what happens. So throw a lot of stuff. Yeah, throw a lot of stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that then lately, I guess we've seen the what is it called, GP3, the generative model that basically can also generate computer programs, which is another interesting, kind of meta programming paradigm.
Yeah, that thing can do a lot of crazy stuff.
Right.
Have you played what is it, AI Dungeon, or that game where it's a text-based adventure, and then you write, and then it makes up a story as it goes. It's really funny.
Oh, I see it there. So yeah, AI Dungeon, huh? That's an interesting one. What actually, that you go to e-commerce sites and look for books written by this algorithm, and you can buy books written by this model, which is super interesting, right? I also, it also happened with the painting, right? So there was like, how do you call this? The sale of this like art for, I think it was like 50K or something like that, some ridiculous amount, and it was actually created by an AI, whatever. So it's like, well, very interesting.
Yeah, wow, that's a curiosity. I don't know about buying a whole book though, but it's damn.
Well, it's co-author, right? Because you gotta kind of supervise that the model is actually outputting things that make sense. Nevertheless, though, I mean, just having a whole book generated partly by an AI is pretty mind-blowing, and it kind of hurts me because it took me like 3 years to write a book, and it's like, and now you have a computer program that can help you. Obviously, a technical book versus like
right,
sci-fi or whatever other topics, but still, I mean, it's pretty remarkable in my opinion.
Yeah, remarkable and scary.
True.
You trained it on my kids' stuff, and it'd be like, my sister is stupid.
Oh god, and it starts fighting.
Do you have enough data
Yeah.
to actually train it?
Oh, plenty. My kids don't shut up.
Wow.
Yeah, it's about similar things all the time. So it's really a strong, strong data set.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, generative stuff is incredible. There's DALL-E. Have you seen that, where it creates art? You say, I think the example is avocado and chair, and it creates a bunch of chairs shaped like avocados. It's just insanely crazy.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. No, this is really fun stuff.
That one is actually pretty recent, right? The DALL-E.
Yeah. I think it's 2 months in January. I think there's also music videos where it composes music, or lyrics and music based on a certain genre. It's really fun stuff.
Yeah. So you mentioned about Sweetviz, that you wanted to make it interactive and also I think what was the word that you used? Enjoyable or something like that. It does have a feeling of a game, though. I mean, if you look at it, the design actually has some feel of game-like. And also, I wouldn't say that it's completely interactive, but I guess you did put some effort there because you kind of have to hover over stuff and things like that. What, in addition to what's already in there, did you want to add?
Oh, again, how much time do we have?
No, not all of your plans.
Okay.
Top 2.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great if you could. Right now everything is pre-done because that was the quickest thing I could do is that if you just output every possible image that you could possibly create. So for each data, I have the small version, the large version, and maybe a couple variations, but that becomes really heavy. If it was in real time, then I could just save the data and have some JavaScript create the graphs, at the user's request. So a user could say, oh, show me, you could have a slider saying, oh, just show me between this and that. That would be, I think, a huge bang for the buck. So you would have all the data and then you could do all these analyses in real time. Whereas right now you're limited to what was pre-baked initially. It's still pretty good, but and there's some limits to that because you can't bake in. If you have a 2 gigabyte data set, you can't put that in the web page, but you could. There's a couple of things you could do that would be give the user more visibility into the graphs. Right now, I'm
Quick clarification: all of these graphs come with, just like you said, with 2 lines, right? So you basically detect the variables, the columns, let's say that are relevant, and then automatically generate all of these graphs. Is that how it works right now?
Yep. It's interesting because I think it's a way. It's a bit counterintuitive to programmers because you really have to do every case, right? It's for example, you have numerical and categorical data, and then your target value could be numerical or categorical. So now you need to do a graph for a case where, okay, if the target is numerical, but this variable is categorical, I'll do this type of graph. And there's all these challenges and you need to make it fit. Okay. And then you need to do, if it's categorical, numerical, and you need to do all of these combinations. So, and it was a bit tedious, but that's what makes it, I think, special is that, the computer does all the work for you. So it's, you just say, do your stuff and it will go in and case by case do, okay, what's the best way to display this data? What's the best way to display this data? So that's, And that's why I think, because when you're doing data analysis, again, you're asking yourself the same questions over and over. Is just, Sweetviz was an attempt at, going through every possible combination, taking care of it so you don't have to. And I'd love to do that for more steps. Like I said, for detecting or replacing, the next step would be to, there's the EDA part, but then there's the data prep repair part. I would really like to get into, but that's a whole nother can of worms.
Do you take pull requests? I'm not saying that I will submit one.
I got a couple. This is my first open source project. So I was, I learned as I went about, in video games, we're not, well, some teams do, but we don't use GitHub. So I was kind of a noob with GitHub. So I had to kind of learn as I went. I think it went okay. I got a couple pull requests. I accepted a couple because it's great, to have people actually look at your code, figure it out, because sometimes, you write this, I don't have a whole lot of time, I want to get this done. You kind of throw it out there and like, oh, people are going to see this, but better to have it than have it not have it. So it was kind of, you said, earlier we were asking about people using it and such and such. It was, I didn't get that feedback, but to see that people say, hey, I looked at your code and I thought you could fix this here. I was like, wow, that, people are actually looking at it. So that was great. So yeah, when there's a good suggestion, I'll take it. Sometimes though, people will have suggestions that are good, but it would otherwise maybe compromise part of the whole thing, right? I want this feature, but then, it wouldn't generalize. It would break some other cases. So I'm trying to be very conservative as to what I accept. So, because it might be intuitive to one person, but then it might, not be intuitive for other people. So I got to be careful. Sorry, that was a bit of a general description, but yeah, I'm trying to keep it so it's very simple and generalized. But yeah,
that makes sense. I've seen that in other libraries where they get a pull request with a feature for, that adds a bunch of functionality. And it's like, well, these two things that you added are in scope for what we want the library to do. And the others are useful, but should be in their own library because they're outside of the scope, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Or people are seeing things one way and then, like, yeah, I want this graph to show this, but then, you need to add another, there might be implications where, but what if you do categorical data, then this won't hold. Then you need to redo this whole other part of the lib and it cascades to keep things consistent. Yeah. So I haven't had that many pull requests, so it hasn't been too bad of a problem, but it's definitely fun to do an open source project with people participating and things like that. And I try to be on top of bugs. That's another thing. There's so many environments, right? Somebody will say, I'm getting this weird, right now there's one or two issues where people are getting their reports. It looks completely, there's, the scales are off, the graphs are all over the place. I have no clue why that's the case, right? Because it works for 99.9% of people. And there's something in that person's configuration, they're in Jupyter, there's this version, there's something off, and that's...
You need to create a Docker container. Go like, it works in the Docker container, just, solve the problem.
Yeah, that is one of those magical things, working with games and Linux and things like that is just like, yeah, you just want something that, it's a package. It just works in all cases. And that's it. Yeah.
Well, there's always going to be that, that one person go like, oh, but it doesn't work because of this or that.
Always.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. All right. Well, anything else we should hit before we do picks?
Yes, one more thing. I would say that so I'm sorry, I don't think we mentioned the Neo project though, but I think that's probably, I don't know, in my view, that is to me the leap forward, right? Really interesting concept. I mean, I don't know how functional it is. You show a whole video with how to use it. It seems pretty functional. I suppose you were wearing your VR. I mean, you mentioned that, and then just like manipulating the data somehow. But yeah, can you talk about that project just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of my, looking at an Excel spreadsheet for an hour and trying to visualize it in my head.
I'm sorry.
What?
I'm looking at an Excel spreadsheet for an hour. I'm sorry.
Like I said, I'm weird that way, I guess. That's just fun to me. Depending on what the data is. Just generally, looking at anyway. But I wanted to see if there was a way to get a better understanding. It's more about getting a general feel for the data, and it was really one of the experiments I did there was that you can visualize in 2D on a computer screen, and then you can visualize in 3D, but it's always on the screen it'll be a little bit to the side. So being in VR, you can be in the 3D, and then you can understand it a whole lot better, and that worked very really well. The problem is there's very few problems that have three features. And one of the cool things I tried with that project was to do 6-dimensional visualization. And that worked out decently well, where where you take 6 dimensions, and I'm not going to be able to explain it, but you pretty much, you take there's 3 main dimensions, right? And then the other 3 you divide into quartiles, let's say. And so you make a cube. It's a cube of cubes. where every subcube is, let's say, a quartile of the data. You should go see the video because I don't think I'm going to get out of this. But basically, it's an attempt at visualizing at least six degrees of freedom in the 6 variables at once, and that actually worked pretty decently. But it's not going to go higher than that. But this is the kind of weird stuff. The other thing I wanted to do was that with your hands, you can highlight a certain cube of data, and you can get things like what's the average value of this and that feature, or you can see, it's really nice to be able to see clusters of false positives, false negatives, and things like that inside, because you can visualize, post modelization and see what the results are and what the distribution is. One of the reasons I didn't push that farther is that I didn't have personal problems that warranted visualization. I did some consulting where it really helped to be able to visualize. But the thing with VR is that you need a VR kit. And I did that 4 years ago. We're on the cutting edge. Now there's more things where you don't need to be tethered. You can do it's standalone. It's much more user friendly. So it might be more useful, but it's an interesting aspect that some people have found an actual business use for it, which was great. But it's still a bit of a niche project. There's one of the things I think, I mentioned Sweetviz, if I had all the time in the world, is real-time manipulation of models and data. Like I said, replace the missing data with the average, or replace with this or that, or maybe tune models more or less in real time. Or one of the things that the NEO project does is you can mark a cube and say, okay, I want to run the model just in this cube with this type of parameter and things like that. So you can kind of fine-tune your model with your own hands in real time visually, which is, I didn't go too far in, but I did see, results there. And that was really interesting. Anything interactive is I think something that's way underused in the field, and VR kind of takes it to the next level.
Yeah, and I that's what I was going to say, actually. I was going to highlight that I think the leap forward portion is that you can actually interact with that data in a, you don't have to be a programmer or a data analyst, right? You can just, you have the bunch of data and it looks like regular plots, but then you can actually go in there, zoom in, basically look at the little samples. Perhaps, you could, look at the single sample, put it back into the data set. You have so many opportunities there for interacting with your data that I think is, it's a pretty powerful idea.
Yeah.
Of course, there needs to be a lot of work. But it's like any new idea, right?
Yeah. And one of the things about VR is I'm a big proponent of, to take technical term or, buzzwords, to have like a business impact. And that's part of the communication part you said. And, VR is nice and flashy and everything, and I love it. And it's really magical to be inside the data, but, it's very Matrix. I'll name that Neo for a reason. But there needs to be a business impact. And I think a lot of the interaction stuff that you can do in VR, right? You say, oh, look at a data sample and something like that. I think a lot of that you can already do in 2D, but people aren't even doing that, right? And that's kind of where Sweetviz to me is doing the very basic EDA stuff that should be standard. But then, and it's not even doing that. But even without going into VR, I think there's huge potential for, much better interactions that have a big impact without having to put on a VR helmet.
Right. And I think the 60s, that's okay. But you can also do that. You have just a bunch of 3D cubes, right? You can put that into a notebook. You don't have to do VR, right?
Yeah.
Do you? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure. But I would say that interacting with the data and not having to tell, you're talking about business impact. You're not going to have the business people actually go into, a Jupyter notebook or, sit next to a data analyst. You can just tell them, here's the data, you can explore it. And, if there is an intuitive way, and I think you did a couple of like menus and things like that, is a really, really great idea, I thought, actually. So congrats on that one. So, but just to have a menu or whatever and have different options, I think that brings a lot of business value, right? To let the decision makers be able to analyze the data in an intuitive way, as opposed to multiple dimensions. I think the multiple dimensions is a good idea just as it's a good idea to, split the data and be able to kind of, concentrate on a subset, right? But the interactive part, that is, again, leaps, right? That's a big jump, I would say.
Yeah. A lot of the work, is in visualization and communication, as you were saying, and people do use Sweetviz for some of that. I think that's that's a very basic step. And then the other thing about VR is that the data scientist, you can do a video, and that's something that's I obviously did. But if you do want to point things out, even a video of somebody going into VR can explain, can be useful to explain something. But then again, that's another level of communication.
Very cool. Hey, folks, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been working a lot on figuring out how to help people become the most valuable developers on their teams, or becoming the top 5% of developers in the field. If you're looking to level up, figure out how to contribute more, get the career you want, get the career that you want that will support the lifestyle you want, then you should check out the Most Valuable Dev Summit. I've invited some of my friends across the community, people that you've heard of, people that have worked on systems that you use on a daily basis, people who have invented new ways of doing things over the years in programming, and I've asked them one question, and that question is, how do you become a top 5% developer? How do you become 1 in 20 of the best developers out there? And so we're going to go ahead and have that conversation with them in interviews on the Most Valuable Dev Summit, and you can find that at summit.mostvaluable.dev. All right, well, let's go ahead and do some picks. Now, you haven't been on the show before, so we'll just explain. Picks are just things you want to shout out about on the show. Some folks pick tech stuff every week. Some folks pick like book stuff or other stuff every week. There was a guy on one of the shows that picked a different beer every week. So, just whatever kind of floats your boat. So, Miguel, do you have some things you want to shout out on this week?
Yeah. So I started watching. I don't know if I did this one, but I'll do it again if I already mentioned this one. But I started watching the Deep Unsupervised Learning course, Berkeley course by Peter Abil and colleagues, and I think it's pretty good. So for folks who like that kind of stuff, I am going to share that link and let folks know about it. It's pretty good. I actually watched 2 lectures, and obviously what interests me is the relationship between this and reinforcement learning, but they do mention that a few times, and yeah, pretty good course. So highly recommended.
Nice. I'm going to do a couple of shout outs related to dev influencers. So first of all, if you are interested in dev influencers, what I'm finding is that some people, they get kind of to the top of their game, right? So they don't really have many opportunities for advancement where they are, or that advancement looks like moving into management or architecture or infrastructure, and it's not the direction they want to go, right? They want to keep playing with code or finding cool stuff like this to play with. They're listening to this, but don't really have the opportunity to move into it. And so, they're looking for what's next. And the influencer stuff is kind of the opportunity where they can go play with stuff and they go talk about it. And, you get to help people out along the way. So devinfluencers.com is where all that stuff's going to live. The podcast is going to be there. If you want to be part of the Dev Influencers Accelerator, get coached by me on how to set up a podcast and do all that cool stuff, you can go to devinfluencers.com/apply. And we do a weekly call, coaching. I am also basically doing like texting with people. So if they get stuck or anything during the week, you don't have to wait for the call. I'll just help you get unstuck and we'll keep you moving. I've also been using Teachable. So the tools I'm using for that are Teachable, and I'm just putting videos up, right? They're a little bit raw. I'm going to go back and polish them and turn it into a course. But right now I'm just getting the stuff in that people need. And I'm really liking the platform Teachable. So teachable.com, and I'll put a link in. I'm trying to get an affiliate link. Doesn't cost people anymore, but I like getting a kickback when I recommend a product I like. So teachable.com, it's pretty awesome. Another one that I'm using is Voxer, Voxer.com. And essentially what it is it's a phone app, and you can do text type messages on it, kind of like WhatsApp or whatever. But it has a big orange button at the bottom of it. And if you hold the button in, it'll record a voice memo and send it to the person on the other end or to the group. And that's pretty convenient. I much prefer sending somebody a voice memo than to try and type on my phone. And so I like being able to just, respond to somebody and just tell them what we need to do to get unstuck. So I like that. It's pretty convenient. So Voxer app on your iPhone or Android phone. And then the other thing that I'm using is Thrivecart. And that's what I'm using to let people pay for the accelerator. And the reason I'm using Thrivecart, so Teachable has a shopping cart function built in, and it's terrible. It's just terrible, right? I've talked to some people about like Kajabi, which is another system kind of like Teachable. Their shopping cart also terrible. Okay. Thrivecart is awesome. It lets you do the subscriptions. It lets you do the sales and the upsells. It's really terrific. So thrivecart.com, also trying to get an affiliate link on there, but it's a great product. And so if I don't have one in the show notes, by the time you're ready to buy it, just go get it anyway, right? Because it's a great product. But I'm really, really digging these products. They work really, really well. And I'm recording the videos with ScreenFlow, and that's at screenflow.com, which I think will take you to the telestream.com product. I've been using them forever, but it only works on Mac, but it works really, really well. And I'm really happy with that. So those are my picks. Francois, what are your picks?
Well, I didn't prep anything, but I would give a shout out to Feature Tools. I haven't really used it a whole lot, but it feels like as good as any lib out there along the lines of what I said about automating things, for prepping data. What it does is it automates feature engineering to some degree. So it takes it mixes, it combines existing features and data sets and does, a whole bunch of automated synthesis to try to find things in a data set that could be significant to help modelization. Anyway, I would say to check them out because it's along those lines of automating things and helping out something that doesn't need to be so manual labor intensive. And it uses the broad power of computers to find combine hundreds of things together that manually would take way too long. So I check that out. And in general, if you find yourself solving the same problem over and over, to check out if there are libraries like that, like Feature Tools or EDA libs like Pandas Profiling or Sweetviz that can automate a lot of what you're doing day to day, because there are a lot of people out there, lots of libs, and lots of problems are solved that you might not think of looking for automated solutions. That's it.
Cool. And one more question: if people want to connect with you online, I'm guessing you're on GitHub and Twitter at the very least. Where do they find you online?
I have my website. I don't know if I should give it or, there's, it's FB is, FB Francois Bertrand, designpro.com, probably. And then there's my email and some bio info there. But the GitHub for Sweetviz is also a great place, especially, anything related to Sweetviz. GitHub now has this discussion feature, which is great. So just general chat. So that's another place there if it's not necessarily with Sweetviz, you can just hit me up there.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks for coming, Francois. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me. It was great. Like I was telling you earlier, it's my first kind of podcast. So, appreciate the opportunity. It was really a lot of fun.
All right. We'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, max out.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.